Today is my first painting stream, which has been like 6 months in the making. So I'm extremely excited. I have streamed video games before, but my ultimate goal was always painting. You'll see some stuff in the background. I'll get to that in just a second, but kind of want to tackle one kind of theme on every stream. And so this one is going to be direct painting and layout. You know, how do you draw? How do you make sure everything is where it needs to be? So we're going to start with that. So let's paint. So this here, I'm going to get out of the way. I don't know which is best. Also, don't mind my horrible self-done quarantine haircut. Just please ignore it. No comments, no hate, please. So now that I'm kind of out of the way here, you can see me cut off all weird. But anyway, this is my current painting. I've been working on this for quite a while already, so I wasn't able to start it on stream. This has actually been a work in progress for the better part of a year, I think, at this point, maybe a little longer. Anyway, it's the perfect point in this painting to show off a bunch of things, one stream after another. So what I have here is I have this orange here is what's called an imprimatura. Kind of just acts as a toned ground to paint on, you know, on top of our primer. I'm cutting myself all weird, but deal with it. So this is basically what we're painting on. We're not painting on the white. This white is actually over top of the imprimatura. So this is kind of just a placeholder at this point to kind of block in that shape. It's probably going to be a much smoother white or off-white in the end. So really this orangish color is what we're painting on. So all this is paint, this is paint, this is paint, this is all paint. The only thing that's not really painted yet is the clothing for the most part and some limbs. You will see that there's some like ghostly white, you know, going on in the flesh, and that's really it's not a direct painting style. It's an indirect painting style, and basically what that is that's really just painting in lights and darks, and we're going to glaze color over top of that eventually. But for now, don't even worry about that. That's going to be another stream. The focus here is going to be this chair and the pattern here, because this is going to be a direct painting. So really the difference between indirect and direct is how you're applying color and what the end result is going to look like. Because let's say you mix the exact color you want, you put it on your brush and you put that on your surface. In this case, this is a panel. Just for reference, it's a piece of wood, masonry to be exact, and then it's got some bracing on the back so that it doesn't warp, and it's sturdy. So really, the actual panel we're painting on is very thin. It's not just a giant chunk of wood. So just for reference. So if we mix this color on our palette and we put that on our brush and put it directly onto the surface, that's direct painting. Indirect painting is something completely different. I'm going to stop cutting myself off here, I think. Also, if you follow, you get your name on the wall. I will literally draw on the wall your name. So anyway, back to the painting. Talk about direct. Indirect, like I said here, it's an indirect method of getting what you want, because this here is really just white and a brown, never mixed, but I'm painting in the lights and the darks. And eventually there's going to be color over top of it. So we never actually mix the color that we want and put it onto the surface. It's always transparent layers, and the end result is the combining of those layers. So again, focus on direct painting. This is directly painted. I did mix this blue. You can see some of the imprimatur, this orange still showing through. And depending on what you're going for, that can be a good thing. What it does is it adds a lot of depth, because technically this orangish color is the opposite color of our blue here. So it adds depth, because it's not just a solid blue space. It's blue with some orange in there. And I really don't want to move my detail camera here to show that, but I'm sure you'll see it at some point, really close up. So basically everything except flesh is a direct painting at this point. And currently what I'm working on, what I have my close-up camera on here, which you can see, this is where I'm at. You'll see that there's this really intricate pattern here. And what I'm doing is I'm drawing in the pattern, so that when I do direct paint this section, I'll be mixing my colors and putting them in place, and I know where to put them because I've laid out the entire pattern. And so I'll be worrying about, which color goes where, is it a highlight, is it a shadow, etc. And I'll be mixing my paint accordingly. But here, you'll see my pattern is non-existent right here. And the reason is I just haven't done it yet. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And this is a great spot because there are these buttons here. I don't know if you can see them. Yeah. You see these buttons here? They're like rivets in the bottom of the chair. And there's a lot of them. And drawing something that there's a lot of is more difficult than if there's just one or two. Especially when they're this close together and there's like a dozen of them. You have to kind of count them individually and really look at each one by itself. Because if you just go in and say, oh, there's 12 buttons, I'm going to make 12 circles, you're not representing reality. And that's the constant battle you're going to be dealing with is what I'm drawing or painting matching reality or our source material? Assuming that you want to work representationally like this is. I mean, this is clearly two women here, one sitting on a chair in some sort of space that's not really fleshed out yet, but this certainly isn't an abstract painting, at least in a traditional sense. So what we're going for here is representing our source material, which unfortunately I am working from a photograph. When you have the option, you don't want to, but today in 2020, it's almost impossible to not work from one. It's just not efficient to have a model, sit down in a chair for hundreds of hours while you work on this. So working from a photo, and there are some things that you need to keep in mind when working from a photo so that things don't end up too flat. Lighting specifically, when you're actually taking your source material, you want to make sure there's good lighting. That's a topic for another day. So we're drawing this pattern. The pattern is mostly done here. We're just going to focus on this part. I'm going to jump into it. What I'm going to do is I want to kind of introduce the tools I'm using here. You'll see in my hand here I have this fine brush. It still has the plastic cap on it. This is really just a fine brush, so we can do some fine detail in there. It's a flat or a round brush, and nothing particularly special about it. There are a few other things that we need if we're working with oil paint, which this is. This is oil. It's not acrylic, tempera, whatever. Oil painting is different because it's an oil. It doesn't dry like an acrylic paint would or basically every other one. It cures over time, which is actually a chemical process rather than the water evaporating out of the paint. And that process takes a hell of a lot longer than drying, like acrylic paint drying. So that gives us some advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is the paint isn't going to dry fast. You can blend really well. You know, that paint is going to stay wet and we can blend into it really easily, and we can get some really great effects out of that, you know, working wet into wet. And by wet into wet, I mean wet paint on your brush on wet paint on your surface. It's very different from wet on dry, or in some cases you can consider a type of dry on dry, which isn't so much with oil, but it is an option, a possibility. So where was I going with that? Oil paints. So this is an oil painting, and you may say, well, this is really fine detail and you're touching this. This isn't wet. And that's true. It's not. Oil paint will cure. If it's a thin layer, it's usually dry to the touch in like a week. If it's really thick, it could take up to a year or two. If it's really thick, your innermost parts of that paint in thick areas could take years to cure. And so it might be dry to the touch, but if you ever like push on it, it could explode like a little balloon. So this is relatively thin and it is dry. If I wanted to, I probably could take some of my terpenoid here, paint thinner, and really scrub at this, and I could rub off some parts I wanted to erase if I wanted to. That's another good thing about working thin in the beginning, is you have the option of erasing. And if you're in the middle of a session and you need to erase, all you need to do is wipe it off. So this is dry. This detail has all been done on this dry bluish green background. So I'm really just painting these lines in to lay it out. So I already mentioned my paint thinner. I have it in this little jar thing specifically for oil painting. It has a little tray inside of it that will let you get paint out of your brush. It also has a section inside where you can clean the terpenoid out, paint thinner out of your brush before you wipe it off. It just, you know, is a bit more efficient. Not necessary. You could also use something like a glass like mason jar with like a Brillo pad in the bottom to really get the paint out of your brush. A lot of options. You definitely don't want to go with like plastic or anything like that, because I'm pretty sure it will eat through plastic, so you definitely don't want that. Another thing that I will be using is this painting medium. Let's see if I can get a close up there. You see it's this yellowy stuff here. And this is what I'm going to do. This is technically like colorless oil paint, right? So this is what we're going to be thinning our paint with. Even though this is called paint thinner, we're not going to actually, we don't want this to end up on here. This is mostly for cleaning our brush. If you want to, you can kind of make your own combination medium with some of this if you want it really thin. I'm not going to do that. What it does is it gives you a really chalky end result, which you may want. I have used in the past, but it would be very out of place here. So just oil medium here, painting medium. So this is what we're going to thin our paints with. Now paint, I am specifically using the cheap Winsor & Newton version, or Winsor Newton, I don't remember. It's there somewhere under all that wear. I'm pretty sure it's Winsor Newton. The cheap version is Winton. That's what I'm using. It's heavy body. I don't even know if you can get a non-heavy body oil paint, but if you are taking some of this over to acrylic paint, your typical acrylic paint in like a squeeze tube thing is not going to be heavy body. It's going to run everywhere. And you'll see that this is going to be very thick. If we want something that's thinner and flowy, we're going to have to thin it down with our medium. So in this case, I'm going to be using burnt umber to draw this in. It's also a good option for if you're drawing anything directly on your imprimatura. It's just enough contrast without, being jarring. You'll see here, this is burnt umber. All my darks here in this indirect section are burnt umber. This orange, if you're interested, is a burnt sienna. And it's a traditional imprimatura color. You can make imprimaturas in other colors, but there's a difference between imprimatura and a tone ground. Imprimatura is always transparent. Here you can see differing amounts of transparency in my brushwork here, but it's transparent and you can still see the remnants of the white background behind it. The difference with a ground is a solid color. So if I were to really layer this up with 2 or 3 layers, it would be just a solid orange, and that would be a tone ground. And there's a very big difference between that. I think that's going to be a topic for another session. So that's really it. I have my source material on my iPad here. I've got a paper towel. I'm working on a little piece of glass as my palette. There are actual palettes, like oil palettes. You can work on woods. Really, it's just preference. I'm not even going to show my palette because it's pretty poorly set up and not a good example, because I'm only using this brown. So palettes will be a topic for another discussion. So just taking the plastic off of this, setting it off to the side. Going to open my medium here, and we're going to start. So I might be blocking some things. If I do, just say something in chat. Tell me to move my big head or whatever is going on. You're going to see me constantly looking down here, and that's because I have my iPad. Will shut off regularly. I'm going to have to keep turning it on, but it's probably better if your source material is up and close to where you're working. And also you want the part that you're working on to be around eye level. You don't want to have to squat down like I'm about to do. Don't do that. You're going to kill your back. If there's a lot of awkwardness that comes from your tensing, you may not be able to get the full range of motion that you want out of your brush. So because of the size of this, I can't really bump it up. I'll be going through the ceiling, which obviously isn't an option. So I will probably be on my knees. I don't know how tall I'm going to be. Let's test this out. Okay, you can still kind of see my head. It just looks like I'm standing, and this is a super high up painting. So I'm going to be working on this from my iPad right here. My palette is right underneath my iPad. My iPad is actually on my palette, which I also don't recommend, especially if you're working with a full palette with all of your colors laid out. It's going to be a mess. You don't want electronics or anything valuable anywhere near it whatsoever. So let's get to it. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of my medium on my brush, and I'm going to really thin my paint here. And the reason is we want something very fluid that we can paint with. We don't want thick paint. We don't want it clumpy. We want it as smooth as possible so we can get the detail we're looking for. So it's kind of tough with a brush this small to get enough medium, so you might have to do a few dips. But essentially what you want is something that's the consistency of like milk. You want it to flow, but you still want it to have a little bit of body and opacity, a little bit. You don't want it to be so thin that you can hardly see it. And what you definitely don't want is you definitely don't want it to be so much medium that when you paint, it's gonna like bead up like water on plastic or something like that. You don't want beads. You want it to flow relatively uniformly. So we have everything we need. We've mixed our little bit of paint. We're gonna have to mix some more medium in eventually, but we're ready to go. So I can't really easily show my source material. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of explain it. So I'm gonna get down here and I'm gonna zoom in on it. And I know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 buttons that I've already done on this plane here. Going all the way back, let's see, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19 total as we go back in space. So you'll see if I were to just kind of draw a circle 19 times, we'd probably have to like go out to here or something. And that's just perspective. I mean, things farther away get smaller and smaller, even on such a small scale like this. So we have, what did I say? There's 6 here, so we have 13 to do. So 13 are going to fit in this space. So when you're drawing, wow, I'm talking so much before I've even painted, but I kind of want to go over the idea of drawing and laying stuff out. You want to do everything in your power to make sure that what you're painting is accurate, if that's what you're going for, you know? So you may see, I don't know, let me see if you can see some of these grid lines. I think you can, actually. I think you can see this here. Is that what I'm looking at? Yeah. This line here, that's a horizontal line. Whoa, this is hard to do. There we go. That there goes all the way across like that. That's a horizontal line, part of a grid that I've set up over the entire drawing. Now you may know what I'm talking about if you've ever like had like a coloring book back in the day and it had a grid and then it had like a turtle or something and that was gridded off and then you tried to draw the turtle in the grid. And it seemed way easier than if you were to just draw the turtle on a solid, you know, white piece of paper. That's the idea. It is easier when you have a smaller, you know, section that you're working in. When you're working this big, sometimes depending on the size of your grid, it could still be pretty difficult. But the idea is don't leave anything up to, you know, creativity or anything like that. You want it to be as exact as possible. Back in the day, masters would set up an actual like string grid box for their models to stand in or sit in or whatever, so that they would have those same reference lines in 3-dimensional space that they could translate to their painting. You may say, oh, you're not drawn, you're not that good, you have no talent. It has nothing to do with it. It really doesn't. Being able to draw this way versus any other way that anyone might teach you, it's the same process. We're just shrinking down our individual drawing size and doing multiples. Pretty much anyone who can draw well, effectively this way, can draw just as well without them. It's just not going to be as precise. And if you're really going for likeness, or you're doing a portrait for a loved one of someone, you really want to nail that. And so the same way you know, if you're a professional, anything at all, you take it seriously and you want precision, this is how you do it. You don't have the attitude of, oh, I'm a good artist. I don't need that stuff. Because that's just you creating your own rules like a scrub. So do not be afraid to do that. It's what the masters used. What you want to avoid, the other kind of end of this spectrum, is when you make this grid, you make a drawing, and there's absolutely nothing original about that drawing, and it matches your source material exactly. That's when you have a problem, because you've essentially just become a fancy Xerox machine. And if you've ever been on Instagram and you've gotten on like an art hashtag or something like that, you're going to see a lot of that. And I don't even get me started. It's just silly. I digress. Our drawing. You'll see these lines here. So we're going to use those lines to really nail this drawing. So I have another one here, a vertical one. I don't know if you can see it right there. I think you kind of can. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I have this corner here. I have a horizontal meets a vertical. And so I'm already shrinking my painting down. I don't need to worry about these rivets or buttons or whatever that are here. I'm really just worrying about what's here to the right of this vertical line. And to a smaller degree, what's underneath this horizontal line here, because there's going to be a point where they kind of break into that area and move back in space. So I'm going to count how many there are to the right of this line. So there's one that's like halfway on it. I'm going to ignore that one. We don't want to worry about that one. We're just talking about whole rivets that are here in this space. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6 that we've done, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 full rivets before we get to that horizontal line. So once you've counted them, you've already made this a much more understandable task. If you were to just kind of eyeball it and put those in, it's going to be miserable. None of them are going to be accurate. So what did I say? 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2. Okay, I'm not going to forget it this time. 4. There's 4 buttons. And it seems like, yeah, they'll fit pretty easily in there, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the first one and we're going to single it out and we're going to compare it to a lot of different things. So it is insanely hot in my studio right now. I underestimated the heat that these lights would give off, and I'm in a hoodie, and it is beginning to be a lot like summer here in Pennsylvania. So I am dying. Hopefully I don't actually die. Okay, so we're going to actually put paint on this thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by comparing the top of the button, because there's going to be a very distinct top corner and bottom corner. Because these are going back in space, they almost come to a point at the top and the bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark what I believe is a line where that top section is. And what I'm doing is I'm basically just comparing a line like this compared to the top of this one. Now, when you're working with angles like this, you really want to be extra careful. I actually don't recommend this if you're just starting out, at least for the end result. You may want to start this way, but what we're going to do is we're going to kind of triangulate where the top of this button is. So first thing after that is we're going to do the bottom edge, and we're going to see where that angle is, and that makes sense. We've kind of blocked this top and bottom edge in. Let me just double check that, because yep, see, this wasn't quite accurate. So it's more like that. So see, I'm just wiping the paint off. That's something you can't really do with acrylic. If you do that, you're just going to smudge it. It's not going to come off, and you're going to have a bad time. So we have the basic top edge of our button. Just triple checking this here. Seems to be good. So we know that the top corner and bottom corner are going to be somewhere along this line, right? We just don't know where. We don't know if it's here or if it's over here. We just know that it's going to be somewhere on that line. So now we need to start comparing these lines to other things. I mentioned you want to triangulate positions as much as possible. We have this grid to go on, so we can measure, based on other points of reference. We know the grid is absolutely perfect because I drew my grid on my source material in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. So I know that these are perfect compared to my source material. So we can compare them to this edge, we can compare them to the corner. We can also compare to other parts of my drawing if I'm confident that they're accurate. So we're going to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to compare it to some of the rest of the drawing here. And I know that this button is essentially almost straight down from the tip of that. So it looks like it's going to be somewhere right there. All right. And I just made a little cross, crossing that line now. And we're going to continue to compare it to other things until we are extremely confident that that is where that is, right? It may seem like a long process at first, but once you're comfortable with it, it's just going to go fast. You're just going to be like, oh, yep, yep, there it is. The good thing about this is that you know it's going to be accurate. You know, especially in something this complex, you're going to have the accuracy you need to make this all fit together. Because the worst thing that can happen is you start drawing this and all of a sudden you're way over here when really you should be over here. It's going to just kill your painting. It's going to look flat. Unless that's what you're going for. There's always that unless where you can break the rules. Anyway, here we are. Let's make sure this is where we're at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare that to the corner of my grid here and the corner of my grid here. So I'm making this angle here and I'm going to compare it, and I'm actually going to stand up to do this because working on my knees I can't get a good angle at my source material. It's kind of like I have to do this instead of this. So again, I'm not working ideally, but you got to make it work somehow. So let's get this line, and I have got my angle here and it looks pretty good. So I could keep comparing this, but for time's sake I'm gonna trust it for now. Then this bottom corner, I need to practice not blocking this. So this bottom corner here, we're just going to compare to the top with a simple line, right? Maybe it's perfectly straight down. That's super easy. Might be off a little bit, like a slightly turned angle. It's going to be super easy. If we're confident in that top corner, we're going to be super confident in that bottom corner just with one line, right? So I'm going to do that, and it's actually slightly turned this way. So I think it's somewhere around there. Can you see? Oh, you can see this detail. Nice. I didn't expect it to be that good because this white space here is very washed out, but it seems to be working pretty well. All right, so I'm just going to double check this angle. Looks pretty good. Now we have two very, very distinct points, right? And those are going to be what we use to draw our rivet here. So this one I know starts with an angle kind of like that. Let me double check it. Looks pretty good. This bottom edge starts with a more shallow angle, and it meets somewhere right there. Right? So what I'm doing is I'm kind of just fudging the corners a little bit to make it as precise as possible. So there we have the right edge of our rivet. All right. So then we're going to do this part that comes out here, and it comes out pretty horizontal. Not so much on the top, right? So then it's relatively flat on this edge here. I'm going to turn it a little bit. You're going to see I'm shaking super bad, and that's because I'm trying to work at a weird angle. We're going to see how this goes. But now that I have this drawn in place, I'm going to really clean up my organizational lines from the beginning, and I just really blocked that out, but that's all right. We're going to double check our angle here, make sure that what we did was good, and it appears to be pretty good. I am going to take a little bit off the bottom here, and now I want to paint in some of the darks, just so I have some sort of idea when I go back and paint color in. I know where my darks and my lights are. So we're going to do that real quick. We don't need to necessarily draw this out with organizational lines. We have such a small canvas here in this shape. I'm just gonna wing it essentially. All right. So a lot of these are dark on the bottom and they're dark on the top. And I think we're gonna move away. So this one specifically, it's actually not that dark on the top, but very much on the bottom. And actually, I think I've made this too wide. Looking at it, I think we're going to slim this down just a bit. All right, we're gonna get our edge back there. So basically this bottom half, or I don't know, third-ish of it is dark. There's like a weird shadow that comes up like that. And then there's the top section at the very peak is a little in shadow there. So we have our rivet. Now keep in mind that these aren't all perfectly in line. So you'll see that just visually, the tip of this one is like right here. It kind of looks like it's a little lower than this one, and visually it is. So you want to kind of step back and look at it and say, yeah, that does look like it, right? So what I like to do, because I don't want it super dark, because remember this is just a drawing, watch, I'm going to take my finger and I'm just going to put it over top of it, and we're going to make most of it go away. I got a little carried away there, so I am going to draw a little bit more of it in. Okay. And we're good. So we've done one button out of 4 that we know is on this side. You'll see the type of paints we're talking about. Yeah, I'm working really slow because I'm explaining things, and over time it's not going to be that much. I'm actually like profusely sweating. This is insane. Anyway, I might have to take my hoodie off when I take a break, but you'll see the kind of pace we're working with. It's very slow. To be honest, this has taken so long already. Not quite the pace we're going, but you get the idea. You have to get really comfortable with the process to really make things go relatively quick. That's one of the reasons why this type of painting, the style, is kind of dead at this point. I'm not going to get into why I paint like master Renaissance painters. I actually really don't, in a sense. This indirect method is much more Renaissance-y, right? But just the overall realism and the scenes and subjects that I like to paint, pretty traditional. And this here is something that would not be done this way. This would be a drawing first on a piece of paper. They draw it out, and they'd use this little like thing that looks like a pizza cutter, and it's not perfectly round. It's got little spikes coming out of the sides, and they'd roll it and we poke little holes in their design. They'd lay it down on their surface, and then they'd put like chalk through it. And that chalk would go through the holes, and then they'd be able to say, oh, yeah, that's where my line is. That's something that I really don't want to do, especially with this kind of detail. So we're doing it the old-fashioned way. So let's move on to our second rivet here. I'm going to do the same thing, right? I'm going to get an angle for my top edge. Something like that, right? And this one's a little steeper. Something like that. Let me just double check. That's pretty good. Pretty good. All right. And I just need to find where on that line it is. And this one's kind of wide. This one is wider than the previous one we did. It's essentially straight down from the tip of this. So I'm thinking it's somewhere right there. I'm going to compare it to this line here. Let me make sure you can see this line. Yeah, okay. So I think eventually I will have to move this camera, but I think for now it's pretty good. So let's double check that. I'm comparing it to this again, and it's pretty much spot on, maybe a little to the left. Then we're going to compare the top point of it to the bottom. Again, this one is slightly angled to the right as it goes down. So we're going to be right there. I'm going to erase my organizational lines and start drawing this. So this one is very horizontal at the top. This right edge is very shallow. Coming from the bottom, something like that. It comes together somewhere around there. Like I said, this one's really wide, so we're going to make sure we get that wideness and make sure we capture that accurately. This one looks like it's tilted a little bit, which does not represent how it actually looks. So we need to kind of adjust that a little bit. There we go. Much better. So then we're just going to paint the shadow in this, and this one's very similar. It does just kind of go across, but then it comes up really steep on the end here. It's going to get more paint quick. So super steep. It also has another one of these. I'm wondering if that is like a pattern on the buttons, if it's like some kind of like marbleized pattern. I'm not positive. And this one has shadow at the top and then right on that left edge coming down. So I'm not going to get too precise in that shadow. We're going to tap it real quick, lighten it, and we're good. Just want to triple check this top angle. It does seem weird, but I'm going to make sure that that is really well defined. There we go. So you'll see that one went much faster. I didn't explain as much, and so I was able to work a little bit faster. So just going to keep doing that for the next two that are before this horizontal line. I'm going to still kind of explain it as I go, but I'm just going to get to it. So if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, please, if you liked this, I'm not going to like pull your arm or anything, but if you like this, please consider liking, subscribing. It'll help me out, and you can come back for more videos later on. So thank you. So we have two left here. So I'm going to do the same thing. And now we're actually, ooh, one thing I didn't consider here. I can use this angle here from this corner to really make sure that that's dead on, because our next one is actually going to cross that horizontal line here, if you can see that. So I'm going to make this slightly taller because I do think that it's accurate that way. And our next one is going to actually cross this horizontal line. So the angle is like this. I'm going to double check. That's pretty good. And then this one, this button actually seems like it's visually up higher than the rest of them. So we're going to raise that bottom edge quite a bit. That looks pretty good. And I know that it's going to be above it. So actually this is probably going to be somewhere like here. I'm going to compare it to this pattern here and this. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of off. But anyway, I think you can see that. Yeah. So we're going to compare it to that. And it's kind of that angle here. So essentially we're looking at something like that. I'm going to compare it to this up here that you can't see, but it looks like it's going to be pretty good. Yeah. So we're actually, not only is it higher up, but it's actually quite a bit further away too. Let me just double check that the last one I did was accurate. I'm going to take a little bit off of this edge and kind of push it over a bit by removing some on the right edge. Let's make sure this looks right when we do it. So got this one coming down this way. On the left side, it's not that horizontal. Comes down like that. And relatively straightforward there. And then really just curves in like that on that edge. So let's clean this up. To make sure that this makes sense. It does seem a lot farther away. You can see the difference here and here. So this is something where, even though we measured this, it's a good possibility that something went wrong, right? So maybe our reference points, here were slightly off. It's really only like 1/8 of an inch that could throw this, out of whack, right? So I'm visually looking at my source material, and it looks like this is relatively centered between this one and this one. So I'm going to do something here that we're going to essentially correct it visually, and then we're going to measure it and make sure it's not so wildly off that it seems really wrong, right? If that makes sense. So basically, we're going to push this left edge over a little bit. Then we're going to erase the right edge a little bit until we get something that looks a little more natural. So that's one benefit of oil paint, is that it's forgiving like that. If that was acrylic, there's no way you're doing that. You're going to have to paint over top of it, right? So now this is more visually in the middle. It is slightly off to the right, but let's triple check this. I think that that's okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some other things here that is going to affect the way that this looks. So we're actually going to start doing some of the pattern here in between these rivets, right? Do I really say right in between every single thing I say? I hope that doesn't get annoying. But anyway, we're going to do some of that pattern, right? So, oh my God, I did it again. I got to work on that. Please call me out when I say right, so I can stop doing it. So we have this here that's already drawn in there. There's essentially a line like this. Follows the curve of that, because remember, these are rivets, so they're really pressed in. So it's going to affect our design, right? And it's going to, oh my God, I'm still doing it. I have to seriously, I'm going to have to like have a counter or something, because that's the only way I'm going to remember that I'm saying it so much. Anyway, back to the design here. There's a second line. It's like this. And this has kind of a textured left edge, right? I need to stop saying right. This kind of fades off the edge. So what I did was I kind of blended just by picking some of the paint off with my finger. So that's something that'll be very, very useful when we start talking about indirect painting, because you want to pull the paint off after you put it down. Make sure it's super, super thin. So this is where our pattern is, right? And we're just going to take the whole thing down a little bit, like that. And actually, these both go into the actual button edge. So we have another one that actually essentially connects these. That. And this curve pattern here continues from this here. So this kind of comes down and then it rolls in like the rest. Just like a line next to it like that comes in and joins it. And there's like a petal edge. And I'm still blocking this. You're going to have to, you got to figure that out. All right, I'm going to try and paint over here. And we have a petal edge that comes out here, comes back in, comes down like that, and then eventually reaches the bottom there. And then this top edge has a line that comes down like that. We'll get to that in just a second. But first we're going to do this top part. So where this meets, there's a seam that comes all the way down here. And we're going to paint up to that seam, but we're not going to paint the seam, because painting the seam You have to kind of keep in mind what actually makes a line in reality. Um, Edges aren't really lines. You want to paint up to the edge of them, but you don't want to just make a line for like a scene because you're not actually drawing the scene. You're just drawing your brain's understanding of the scene. It's a line right here, right? And maybe that's a good organizational line in the beginning, um, but that's not actually going to be there in the long run. Because if you think about the seams on my shirt, you're not actually seeing the individual seam, right? I guess you can here, but it's also not a uniform line. And also, what happened to my music? How long is that for now?